Salut à tous, c'est Madame Sherman ici et aujourd'hui nous allons travailler sur la conjugaison française. Today we're going to be working on conjugation and conjugating verbs online because quite often students will use the internet to help them with their French work. However, they tend to use tools such as Google Translate, which aren't always the most accurate. So I'm going to be teaching you how to use the internet effectively and efficiently, and also in a way that you are absorbing the information that you find and the patterns that you find in the language and the verbs in order to eventually be able to form the conjugations on your own. Anyway, we'll get into that later. What is conjugating? It sounds complicated, but it isn't really. Conjugated verbs are verbs which have been changed to communicate who is doing the action. So, for example, if we think of a verb or a doing word, like to jump, okay, who is doing that action? I jump, but if it's he, we don't say he jump, we say he jumps. We add an S, so we've conjugated that verb to correspond to the change in the subject from I to he. But also, we conjugate verbs to show their tense. So is it in the present tense or the past tense? I jump changes to he jumped when we're talking in the past. So let's look at this verb to buy, which is an infinitive. To buy is in its infinitive dictionary form. I've got another video on that. If you've not watched it, please give it a watch before going on to this. So in the blue box, we've got the present tense. As you'll see in English, with some verbs, it doesn't change much. We just add an S on the end for he and she. In the green box, we've got the past tense, not much of a change there. And in the orange box, we've got the future tense. It won't look the same for all verbs because there are irregular verbs and verbs that follow different rules, but this isn't the example for to buy. Now let's have a look at to buy in French, acheter. And once again, we've got the blue present tense box, the green past tense box, and the orange future tense box. So you'll notice that the endings in the present tense change more than they do in English generally. So these are rules that you have to kind of learn. And the more you look these verbs up, the more you'll learn them. It's how I learned for my GCSEs. I had to look up verbs all the time, but the more I looked them up, the more I saw the patterns, and the more I absorbed them and took them in. You'll also notice that here we've got the accent, but then when we go to the nous form, you don't need an accent. Okay, the past tense is kind of similar to the English in that this past participle stays the same, and we have an E with an accent on the end. Not for all verbs, but for ER verbs. However, here our pronoun changes to include avoir. So instead of saying I bought in French, they would say I have bought. Okay, they call this tense the passé composé. And then we've got the future tense here. So we've got these endings on the end of the infinitives. Now it is imperative before we move on that you are clear in your mind as to what all of these pronouns mean. Otherwise you're going to get a bit confused. So pause your screens now. We've just gone through some of these. Can you write down what each of these mean? Go. Okay, so je or J with an apostrophe, I. We only use J with an apostrophe when the next word starts with a vowel. Tu means you, singular. So if you were talking to one person and you don't necessarily need to be that polite because they're a friend or a member of your family or someone of your age, you would use tu. Il, elle, and on mean he, she, we. On is used more often than we would use the translation in English. So in English, it's like saying one. One does one's homework, okay? But in French, it's used quite often for we, but more verbally. Nous also means we, but written in written French or more formal French. Vous also means you, but this time it's plural. So for example, if I was speaking to the whole class, because I'm speaking to multiple people and saying you, I would say vous. Asseyez-vous, for example. Sit down, I'd use the vous form. or plural. So if you were speaking to me as a teacher or an older person, or someone in royalty, you would use vous. And finally, we've got il and elle, which mean they. However, we would use il if we're talking about a group of boys or a group of boys and girls. And we would only use elle if we were talking about a group of girls. So if I was talking about Little Mix and I was saying they are my favourite singers, I would use elle because they're all girls. Okay, so we're now going to look at my favourite verb, chuchoter, which means to whisper. I love this verb because it's onomatopoeic. Can you hear the sh? Chuchoter, and the sh is the same sound as a whisper. Love it. Anyway, that's beside the point. We're going to conjugate this verb together now, and we're going to do this using a website called www.conjugation-fr.com. Ignore screen recording here. That was a reminder for myself that I've forgotten to delete. Okay, so we're going to go on www.conjugation-fr.com, and this should come up. I'm going to type in my verb of choice, chuchoter. I'm going to click OK. And there you will see its conjugation, singular, in different tenses. But we're not going to look at all of it. Some of it doesn't apply to us. So the present tense and the present tense, yes. Present perfect, yes. We'll need that. However, I want you to ignore this whole column, the simple past and the past perfect. That is university level. We don't really need it. We're also going to need the imperfect, the pluperfect, the future, and the past future. We don't need any of this, so you're going to ignore the subjunctive. Okay, that is once again A-level university standards. And we will need the conditional tense in the present form. Okay. Some of these, by the way, have got funny titles. The present perfect we use in English, but they don't use it in French, so I'm not sure why they've used that as the title. We would refer to that in French as the passé composé. Same here with the past future, we'd probably say le passé antérieur. So anyway, on this website you can see you can see how to say, for example, I whisper would be je chuchote in the present tense. He whispers would be il chuchote. And then in the present perfect or the passé composé, as I prefer to say, nous avons chuchoté would be we whispered. So you've got all of the conjugations there. Okay, so I'm now going to go through in a little bit more detail the different tenses that you will have just seen on the website. So the present tense, obviously it's what's happening now or what happens regularly. So here are some examples. I eat, I swim, I sing, I say, I do. However, you can also have I am eating, I am swimming, I am singing, I am saying, I am doing. In English, these are two different tenses, but in French, they're the same. We then have the present perfect. Now, as I said before, I'm not sure why the website uses this term because we use it in English but not in French. This is actually the past tense, okay? So when you see present perfect, think of it as the past or the passé composé as we say in French. An action that has happened in the past and it is now over. Okay, so here are some examples. I ate, I swam, I sang, I said, I did. We've then got the imperfect tense, which is another past tense. However, this time it is an action that used to happen or that was happening. For example, I used to eat, I used to swim, I used to sing, I used to say, I used to do, but also I was eating. So you would have the same words for I used to eat and I was eating. Je mangeais. You'll also notice that used to, there's no word for that in French. If you look it up on Google Translate, it may come up with something like utiliser, which means used, as in I used the, I don't know, computer. So all they do in French is they add an ending onto the end of the verb to reflect that used. Then we have the pluperfect. So this is an action that had happened in the past. So it's kind of even further ago in the past. I had eaten, I had swum, I had sung, I had said, I had done. Then we've got the future tense. And this is an action that will happen in the future. I will eat, I will swim, I will sing. And once again, there's no way of saying will in French. So if you look up the word will on Google Translate, it will probably come up with the word for a will that you leave when you die. The past future, once again, a bit of a funny title. I've never heard of it referred to as this before. I would call it le futur antérieur. This is an action that will have happened. I will have eaten, I will have swum, I will have sung, I will have said, I will have done. And then we've got the conditional present, which is what would happen. So if I won the lottery, I would do lots more active. I don't know, I can't think of an example. If I won the lottery, I would buy a house, for example. As you'll see here, I've written I would do instead of I would eat as my first example. I apologise for that. It's a mistake on my part. So those are the tenses that I want you to concentrate on. They're the tenses you'll need for a GCSE grade 8 or 9. What I would do is make a note of some of these and think of your own examples, because that will help you with the exercises we're going to come on to later. Okay, right, what I want you to do now is look at these English phrases, please, and you're going to match them up to the correct tense. You can rewind the video to look through everything, or just have a look at your notes. Press pause, go. Okay, let's have a look at those then. So I visit is the present tense. I threw. The present perfect, remember, don't get confused, that really means the past, the passé composé. I was dancing is the imperfect tense. I will decorate is the future tense. I had started, pluperfect. I will have finished, past future. I used to play, imperfect. I would love, conditional present. Give yourself a mark out of 8 and make any corrections. So now we're going to look at how we would translate and conjugate this verb using online resources. They threw. So the first step is to identify the subject pronoun, translate it into French. Well, who is doing the action? It's they. How do we say this in French? Well, there are two ways. We could choose between il with an S and elle with an S. However, it doesn't specify here whether we're talking about girls, boys, or a mixed group. So we're going to be kind of sexist because language is sexist, unfortunately, and go with il. Number 2, we're going to identify the verb and put it in its original infinitive form. So the verb is threw, that's the doing word. If we put it in its infinitive form, that would be to throw. However, when we look it up in a second, we can't put to throw because it will complicate things. We get rid of the to and we just put throw. Number 3, we're going to look up the verb in French on this website, wordreference.com. Okay, so we're going to go on www.wordreference.com and we're going to type in our verb, which is throw, to throw. And if we go down, we have got a variety of options. Now it needs to have a V next to it to show that it's a verb. But we could use lancer. So if we have a look at what lancer means, it's, to propel something through the air. And you can use, an example would be un ballon, une balle. So if that's what you mean, that you're throwing a ball, or then you would use lancer. Otherwise, you can use jeter. So if I was to say to throw out some rubbish, I would probably say jeter. But This time we will stick with our verb lancer. Okay, so that's our infinitive, lancer. Next step is we need to identify the tense needed. So it was they threw, which is the past tense. Now, if you remember, the website overcomplicated it and they called the past tense the present. I'm not going to write it all down because it'll take ages, but the present perfect. So that's what we need to be looking for when we conjugate this verb. So we're going to search for the verb on www.conjugation-fr.com and find the correct translation from the verb table, bearing in mind that they is il with an S, and also we're looking for the present perfect. Okay, so once again, we're going to go on www.conjugation-fr.com. This time we are going to type in our verb lancer, and we identified that we need the past tense, which is the present perfect tense, which is here. Oops. And we need the they form, which is this one here. Ils ont lancé. So they threw is ils ont lancé. Super. Right, now it gets a little bit more complicated. This is just something you have to look out for. So here's another sentence. It looks quite similar. They threw a party, but this time we're talking about girls. So we're going to use elle instead of il. Now, when we're looking up this verb, throw, okay, we've identified the verb, it's the same, throw. We need to be a little bit more careful because it's more of an idiomatic phrase to throw a party. You don't literally throw it, do you? So it's unlikely that that literal translation is going to translate into French. So we need to be careful while we're looking it up. Okay, so this time, once again, we will have identified throw as being the verb. So we're going to type in throw. But we need to be careful here when translating because when you throw a party, you're not propelling it through the air. So it's not going to be, oops, it's not going to be one of these translations here. We need to go down and look for the idiomatic phrase to throw a party. Okay, you can spot an idiomatic phrase when it doesn't literally make sense. You don't literally throw a party. So we can kind of guess that they're not going to use that literal translation for throw in French. So we're going to go down, all the way down until we see here verb à particule. And down here we should have throw a party. Oh, so it's not in that section, but it could be in this section. So can you see how we've got things like a stone's throw, lots of phrases that we use. Shed light on, which isn't a literal phrase, it's quite visual. Throw a sickie, that's another good one. Ah, here, throw a party, to host a celebration. They use faire une fête, to do a party. So our verb there is faire. Okay, the way we can identify it is that it ends in an RE. So that is what we are going to need to look up. Faire in the past tense. So once again, we're going to go on conjugation-fr.com, but this time we're going to type in faire, and we need it in the present perfect, and we need they threw. Now this is they, but we've only got il here. They haven't written elle, but you should know that it's part of the same conjugation, okay? So it's this one, but instead of il, we're going to write elle. Elles ont fait. So they threw a party is going to be elles ont fait une fête. Can you give this one a try then, please? She will sit an exam. Bearing in mind that sit, okay, like sitting down, you're not literally doing that when you're doing an exam. Well, you are, but you can tell that it's an idiomatic phrase. They're probably not going to use the verb to sit in French. So pause your screens and try and use word reference and the conjugation website to translate this. Okay, so the French for she will sit an exam. Hopefully you will have identified that you needed the future tense. And hopefully on word reference you will have found the correct phrase for sitting an exam. Elle passera un examen. Fantastic. Please let me know if you got that right, because I'll be really impressed if you did. Right. I now have 10 questions for you to complete using word reference and the conjugation website. I've done the first one for you and I've set it out with each of the steps. You don't have to set it out like this if you don't want to, but it might help you. So I've identified the subject pronoun and put it in French. I've identified the tense I'm going to be looking for on the conjugation website. I've identified the verb in the infinitive but got rid of to. So instead of to drink, I've just put drink. I've looked that up on word reference. It's come up with boire. And I've then gone on the conjugation website, looked it up in the future tense and found je boirai. Can you please try your best to do questions 2 to 10? Pause your screens. Okay, let's go through those answers. So, I will drink, je boirai. They do, girls, elles feront. We listen is nous écoutons, so that's number 2 is incorrect. I've put that in the future tense for some silly reason. So, they do should actually be elles, they. Excuse my handwriting, it's difficult to do on the computer. Elles font. There we go. Elles feront is actually they will do, because this one was in the future tense. I was thinking in the future tense. Ignore me. That's wrong. Elles font is they do. Okay, we listen is once again the present tense. Nous écoutons. He drives is the present tense, but with he it's il conduit. We wore is the past tense. Nous avons porté. You, plural, so vous had succeeded. We need the pluperfect tense. Vous aviez réussi. Number 7, I will have shouted. J'aurais crié. And there are other verbs that you might have found for shouted. That's the futur antérieur. I'm not sure what is wrong with me. I blame it on lockdown. That's number 8. She would need is elle aurait besoin. This one was more difficult because when you looked up the verb need, you will have found that they say avoir besoin, so you would have had to look up avoir. So really well done if you got that one. It was difficult. Number 9, they, mixed group, take part is ils font partie, present tense. Once again, a difficult one because to take part, they don't literally use the verb take, which is prendre. They use the verb to do or make. They make part. So ils font partie. Number 9, you will lose out. Once again, they don't use their verb to lose. They use the verb to be losing. So in the future tense, that is tu seras perdant. I'm really impressed if you got that one. And number 11, that's a horrible amount of questions, isn't it? 11, I apologise for any of you who struggle with that kind of thing. We used to hang out, nous traînions or entraîner. Nous, you probably use in writing, but traîner is quite an informal phrase, so this one's you're more likely to hear and see. Entraîner. Finally now, this is the final thing for us to consider. You will notice in these examples that I haven't written the pronouns. So for example, Sophie left. You might think, well, I don't know how to conjugate this because what's Sophie? So what you've got to do is identify what you would replace Sophie with in terms, what pronoun you would replace Sophie with if you had to, and you would say she. Yeah, she left. She left is elle est partie. And that's what you'd find on the conjugation website when looking up the past tense. My brother and I will study. So once again, you need to think, what pronoun would we replace my brother and I with? Use the website to look that up and then replace the pronoun back with my brother and I, if you understand what I'm saying. Hopefully you do. And also you need to complete number 3. Isa and Joe were shouting. So pause your screens, give that a go, and then we'll go through the answers. Okay, my brother and I will study. Hopefully you got mon frère et moi étudierons. Sorry, on number 1 I forgot to replace the L with Sophie. There we go. And number 2, yeah, mon frère et moi. You never say me and my brother. Moi et mon frère. It would always be my brother and I. Mon frère et moi étudierons. Super in the future tense. Isa and Joe were shouting. Isa et Joe criaient, because this is the imperfect tense. It's something that was happening. Hopefully you understand that. Email me with any questions. Bravo la classe! On y est arrivé.